Hey everyone, in today's video, I'm going to be going over what I believe is the best greatsword build in the game. It doesn't rely on spirit summonings at all, even though they would make everything even easier, but you do you. And most importantly, there's no boss that can counter this build or is heavily resistant to it. So, with that said, let's dive into it. Starting off with the weapons, we're going to be running MARAIS Executioner's Sword. This thing is going to be our hardest hitting attack, easily getting over 5k damage per use, and it's very straightforward. Just look for an opening in a fight and fully charge up the special attack. Once you let that rip, just watch how fast our health bar drops. Now, there is a lot more going on than just using a special attack. Like, I have a lot of different things buffing this attack up, but they're things you don't have to do yourself, because personally, I hate having to apply 30 different buffs before a big fight and then only having 5 seconds before they fade away once you enter the arena. It's just never been my thing. So the way I get the damage on this thing to shoot through the roof is with the help of our other weapon. You can use any greatsword that your character can wield. I'm going with the iron greatsword. It's the best regular greatsword that you can put whatever Ashes of War or Infinities on. The important part of it is the Ash of War and the Affinity. The Ash of War you want to use is Seppuku. This is going to proc a blood loss on ourselves and give the weapon an extra 30 bleed buildup and 30 physical damage for 60 seconds. I'm also comboing this with the Lord of Blood's Exultation Talisman and the White Mask, so right after we use Seppuku, we get a total of 30% increased damage for 20 seconds. Now, in that 20-second window, this is when you're going to want to start using the Ash of War on MARAIS Executioner to get off huge amounts of damage. And the best part about this is you don't have to constantly activate Seppuku every 20 seconds to keep getting that buff back, because the affinity we're going to place on the greatsword is the blood one. This is going to give the sword 125 bleed buildup plus the extra 30 from the Ash of War Seppuku. So the sword is going to have a total of 155 bleed buildup for 60 seconds. All it's going to take is 2 to 4 swings with this greatsword to proc another bleed buildup. And we don't only get that buff going again, but we also proc a blood loss, doing tons of damage by itself. It's like a never-ending cycle of damage. However, there is one thing to keep in mind with it. If you are trying to strictly proc a blood loss, make sure you two-hand the greatsword, because if you do wield them, you only build up around half to 2/3 of the amount of bleed buildup that the weapon has. I know it's kind of weird, but it's such a minor setback that's so easy to fix. It's just something I thought I should mention. Anyways, the next thing I use to make MARAIS Executioner hit so hard is the Rotten Wing Sword and MILLICENT'S Prosthesis, both increasing my damage from rapid attacks. And if you haven't noticed, MARAIS Executioner is the equivalent of throwing a blender at somebody, so it won't be hard to max out these talismans. And the last one I use is the Shard of Alexander, increasing all Ashes of War damage by 15%. If you can't get 2 of these talismans, some backup options you could use are Godfrey's Icon, increasing the damage of charged attacks, or the Warrior Jar Shard that gives you a 10% damage increase to Ashes of War. Pretty much the lesser version of the Shard of Alexander. And last but not least, the Flask of Wondrous Physic. With this, we actually get a massive damage and defense buff, so I wouldn't just throw this to the side and forget about it. The 2 tiers we're going to use are the Thorny Crack tier, increasing our damage with rapid attacks, exactly like the Rotten Wing and MILLICENT'S Prosthesis, but better. And the second one is kind of up to you. I'm using the OPALINE hard tier to get some extra armor, since the armor I am wearing isn't the best in terms of protection, so this kind of makes up for it. And both tiers last for 3 minutes, which is more than enough time. The armor I am using is the entire Elden Lord set, except for the helmet, just because I like the way it looks, and as mentioned before, the White Mask for a damage boost after blood loss procs. Now, I know I said you don't need any spirit summonings with this build, which you don't, but if you were to use one, the best one to grab would be either the Dung Eater Puppet or the Mimic. They're easily the top 2 Spirit Ashes to use. And finally, we got the stats. So with this setup, you're going to want to reach 50 Vigor for a decent sized health pool. 10 Mind is all you need, because the Ashes of War we use don't consume that much at all. 25 Endurance to regular roll with everything on. 80 Strength to increase our damage. 14 Dex to be able to wield both weapons properly. Don't touch Faith or Intelligence at all. They won't do anything for us. And then get 40 Arcane to increase the damage of MARAIS Executioner and the amount of bleed buildup on our other greatsword. If you want to match this build entirely, you'll need to start with the hero class. If you're using any other starting class, you'll either have to overlevel your character or sacrifice a lot of points from Arcane, but the build will still work the same. If you guys don't think this setup is as good as I said it was, I'm just going to show you guys my thought process and how I take down most of the main bosses in the game now. When it comes to Malena, the first thing I do is use the Flask of Wondrous Physics since it's the longest lasting buff, and then use Seppuku. In the beginning, I'm just trying to bait out one of her attacks to give me an opening so I can land a fully charged Dancing Blade. Right after that, I two-hand the Iron Greatsword and only hit her twice until she jumps into the air to do her water flow dance. When I hit her the third time when she's mid-air, the bleed buildup procs, cancelling her attack, increasing my damage, and also doing a lot of damage to her. I quickly finish off her first stage with another use of Dancing Blade and head to her second phase. In this part, I'll dodge her opening attack, and since you can't really hit her when she has that Scarlet Rod effect going on all around her, I'll just use a health flask and activate Seppuku again before running in with MARAIS Executioner. I pretty much try to do the same combo again, switching to my Greatsword to proc a blood loss, but she does the same attack again. This actually works better in my favor because I know every time she does that, I can guarantee I'll get her with MARAIS Executioner and finish the fight. If she didn't do that attack, I would just swing the other Greatsword until a blood loss procs and then go in with MARAIS. I'm only going to be showing some of the more difficult bosses and not every single one, or this video would be an hour long. So next up is the Godskin Duo. Same thing as the Malena fight, and really every fight, I'll drink from the Flask of Wondrous Physic and then really start the fight. So the best thing to do here is to target one of the Godskin duos at a time. I found going after the bigger one was easier because of the size of him, making it easier to land attacks. Once I've kind of spread them apart, you don't need a whole lot of room, but enough where the other one won't jump in and stop you. I'll lead with Dancing Blade and almost one-shot him. He's left with a slither of health, so I just basic attack him to get him out of the way in a few seconds. The other one I'm more confident for dealing with, so I land two basic attacks that proc a blood loss and then follow up with Dancing Blade. I don't fully charge this one because I saw he was about to swing, and even if I don't fully charge up the attack, it still hits like a truck. Just obviously the fully charged version does more damage. And with the last Godskin, I use a fully charged Dancing Blade on him, but I get interrupted so it didn't one-shot him. So I took a few steps back, seeing he was about to do his rolling attack, and I knew I could catch him with MARAIS. The distance you throw the sword out is so nice, it makes catching or hitting enemies before they get close really easy, and that pretty much finishes the fight. With Malekith, he's really fast, so he manages to close the gap really quickly. I dodged the first attack, but his second ground attack catches me. I'm not good at dodging those up close, which is unfortunate, but it's even more unfortunate for him because I managed to get behind him where he can't hit me and land a fully charged Dancing Blade, instantly putting him into the second phase. Once he's here, I start running at the very start so I can trigger an attack that he does every time that's easy to dodge. After he hits the ground the first time, he jumps towards me, but if you roll towards him, you can completely dodge that attack and get a window to do an attack. The window isn't that big, so I only land a quick Dancing Blade, which still did a lot of damage, but after he jumps onto the pillar and creates some space between us, this is where I made a big mistake. Instead of throwing out another Dancing Blade and potentially finishing the fight, I use my Greatsword to proc a blood loss, because I have that programmed into my brain thinking I need to proc a blood loss before I use MARAIS Execution, which is not the case at all. So I spent the rest of the fight pretty much chasing him around, getting hit and doing everything to try and proc a blood loss, but it did end the fight. For fighting Godfrey, I could usually land a fully charged hit with MARAIS Executioner right at the start. I just had to make sure I dodge his axe throw and roll back towards him to be within range. This takes out about a quarter to 1/3 of his health, and since he attacks so fast, it's really hard to land a fully charged one again. So I focus more on landing quick ones because they'll still do a lot of damage and give me a better chance at dodging his next attack. I mean, I still get hit, but the window to dodge it is there. And then he does his ground slam, and I hit him with a basic attack to trigger his second phase. During the beginning of the second phase, I took a bit of damage, so I used 2 health flasks to heal up before going in with the Iron Greatsword to get that bleed buff back, and also to proc a blood loss for damage. It takes 4 hits this time. He's got a little bit more resistance to blood loss than the other bosses, and as soon as that procs, he instantly goes for the ground slam, and after that second slam, I end the fight with a fully charged Dancing Blade. And lastly, for the Elden Lord, right off the start, I run straight towards him because if you stand as close as you can to him, for some reason, he won't swing at you for a few seconds. I take full advantage of that and land a fully charged Dancing Blade on him that eats half of his health in one shot. Wild. After that, I mistimed one of his attacks, took some damage, but I countered his next attack with a dodge and another Dancing Blade. The attack didn't fully land on him, so he only took partial damage. I didn't use my other Greatsword at all in this fight since Radagon's completely resistant to bleed, so there was no point, other than to get the bleed buff from using the Ash of War Seppuku. I basically do the same thing again, waiting to dodge one of his easier attacks that give me a window to hit him, and I use a few health flasks in the process. I didn't care too much about the health flasks boss because I knew in his second phase I wasn't going to take much damage. After I land the final Dancing Blade, I use Seppuku to get that damage buff, drink a health and mana flask, and try to get behind the Elden Beast to avoid his fire attack. And as you could guess, another fully charged Dancing Blade, almost taking out half of his health again. Now the fight just turns into the basic, chase him around the map until he lands in one spot and starts throwing out some basic attacks. Once he started doing that, I knew I could land another Dancing Blade easily. I follow it up with a couple of basic attacks that also do a lot of damage because of all the damage buffs, and finish the fight off once again with MARAIS Executioner.